I want to start today by putting a very specific image in your mind. It's a black and white photograph.
Okay.
It was taken, I think, around 1910 on the Lower East Side of New York City.
Yeah.
And in the frame, you've got this, grimy texture of the sidewalk, the blur of city life happening in the background. But the focus is really on two men and a cluster of small children.
Right.
And surrounding them is just chaos. It's a mountain of bedding, some old wooden chairs, splintered crates, iron pots, a mattress that looks like it's seen better decades, not just days.
It's a visceral image. You can almost smell the dust coming off that mattress.
You really can. It's this
Yeah.
chaotic pile of intimate personal possessions just violently exposed to the public street.
And when you say intimate, that's the word. It's the stuff that's supposed to be inside, behind closed doors, and suddenly it's not. It's for everyone to see.
Exactly. And if you look at the faces of the men, it's not just sadness. There's a profound bewilderment there.
No.
It reminds me of another piece, an 1892 painting by Eric Henningsen called Eviction. It captures that exact same energy.
It's a timeless look, isn't it? That feeling of total vulnerability.
It is. It's the precise moment when the physical space you call home, the place where you sleep, eat, argue, and love, suddenly becomes a prohibited zone, a place you are legally, formally forbidden to enter.
And that image is so crucial because it grounds us. Today, we are diving into a topic that is often obscured by some of the driest, most impenetrable legal language you can imagine.
Oh, absolutely.
We hear these terms like unlawful detainer, summary possession, writ of execution, or ejectment. It all sounds so administrative. It sounds clean.
It's just sterile, even.
Exactly. But at its core, as that photo shows, it is the physical removal of a human being from their shelter, and it's done by the state on behalf of a landlord.
So that's what we're doing today. We are taking a stack of reports, legal analyses, global economic data, and some really fascinating psychological studies, and we are going to unpack the mechanism of eviction.
The machinery of it.
Yes, the machinery. And I want to be really clear about our mission here. We aren't just telling sad stories, though they are often sad. We're trying to understand how this machine works. How does it happen legally? How does it happen illegally?
And why is it used as, say, a tool for government revenue in a place like China?
Right. Or as a tool for urban renewal in Nigeria.
Yeah.
And then ultimately, what does this process actually do to a person's brain? What's the psychological scar?
It's a massive scope. We're essentially looking at the friction point between property rights and, well, human rights.
So let's start with the basics, the definition. In the simplest terms, what are we talking about? Eviction is the removal of a tenant from a rental property by the landlord. But it seems like depending on who you ask, or maybe where you ask, that definition can shift a little.
It really does.
Right.
Right. If you're in a law school classroom, we might define it as a restoration of possession. It's very neutral language.
Restoration. That sounds so gentle.
It's meant to. The idea is the tenant has breached a contract, usually the lease, and the landlord is simply reclaiming their asset. It's a business transaction.
But if you talk to, say, a sociologist,
Then the framing is completely different. They see it as a cause of poverty, not just a result of it. It's an event that triggers a cascade of negative outcomes. It's not the end of a story of poverty, it's the beginning of a new one.
and we're definitely going to get to that causality loop later on because that was one of the most surprising things I read. But I want to start with the mechanics, the how, because I think there's a huge misconception about what a landlord can actually do.
You mean the Wild West approach?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Let's play this out. I own a house. I rent it to you. You stop paying the rent. You're ignoring my calls, my emails. It's been, say, 3 months. I'm losing money. I'm paying the mortgage on a place I can't use, and I'm not getting income from.
So you're getting frustrated.
I'm getting very frustrated. My instinct is, I have a key. It's my property. I'm just going to go over there while you're at work, change the locks, maybe put your stuff on the porch, and be done with it. It's my house. Why can't I do that?
That instinct is perfectly understandable, and it's what the law calls a self-help eviction. And in the vast majority of jurisdictions, particularly when we're talking about residential properties, it is strictly, unequivocally illegal.
Strictly illegal, so there's no gray area there.
Not for residential tenants, no. The state basically has a monopoly on violence and displacement, and they do not want landlords, or anyone really, exercising it on their own. It's about maintaining public order.
But let me play devil's advocate for a second. If the contract is broken, you haven't paid, why does the state force the landlord to effectively subsidize the tenant's housing for months while waiting for a court date? I mean, that seems like an excessive burden on the property owner.
And that is the primary argument from landlord associations, and it is a valid economic point. From their perspective, every day a non-paying tenant is in the unit, it's a loss. However, the legal history here is all about preventing chaos.
What kind of chaos are we talking about?
Well, think about it. If we allow self-help, we are essentially sanctioning vigilante justice in the housing market. You go and change the locks, the tenant comes home, they're angry, they're desperate, they break a window to get back in.
And then it just escalates.
It escalates immediately. You show up with a couple of big friends to intimidate them. They call their family. You've suddenly got a potentially violent confrontation on the front lawn. The legal system was specifically designed to take that physical confrontation off the street and put it into a supposedly neutral courtroom.
So just to be crystal clear, even if the tenant is 100% in the wrong, hasn't paid a dime in 6 months, is trashing the place, the landlord cannot cut the power, or remove the front door, or turn off the heat in winter.
Generally, no. Doing any of those things is often known as a constructive eviction. You're making the place so unlivable that you force the tenant out.
A constructive eviction.
Right. And if a landlord does that, the tenant can actually turn around and sue them for damages. And what's wild is that tenants often win those suits, even if they owe back rent. The court separates the issues. They'll say, okay, we will deal with the unpaid rent in the proper proceeding, but you, the landlord, cannot engage in a siege to get your property back.
It's like two separate wrongs. The tenant not paying is one, but the landlord taking the law into their own hands is another.
Exactly. The court will handle the first, but it punishes the second.
Okay, so if the siege is off the table, we have to use this system. Walk us through the legal timeline, because I think people imagine this long, drawn-out law and order trial, but the data we looked at suggests it's the complete opposite.
It is definitely not law and order. It's not dramatic. It's bureaucratic. It starts with the notice. This is a piece of paper, a notice to quit or a notice to vacate.
This is the warning shot.
This is the official warning shot. It's a legal document that says you have X number of days, maybe 3, maybe 30, to pay the rent you owe or leave, or in other cases, to fix a lease violation.
And if the tenant doesn't move or can't pay,
then the landlord files a lawsuit. This is the official start of the legal action. And this leads us to the trial phase, which is characterized by one thing above all else: speed.
how fast are we talking? Are we talking weeks, months?
In legal terms, it's light speed. These are often called summary proceedings. The logic, as you mentioned earlier, is that the landlord is bleeding money, so the court docket needs to move fast to resolve the issue of possession.
So what does summary mean in practice? No jury.
No jury, usually. And in many jurisdictions, there's no discovery phase, no depositions, no long arguments. I have seen data from major urban housing courts where the average hearing, the entire trial lasts less than 2 minutes.
2 minutes. To decide if someone loses their home. That's hard to process.
2 minutes, sometimes less. The judge has a stack of files. It's an assembly line. Case number 123. Landlord versus Smith. Landlord's representative, do you have the lease? Yes. Is the tenant current on rent? No. How much do they owe? Okay. Tenant, is this correct? Yes. Judgment for the plaintiff. Next.
It's just a verification of facts.
It's a verification of a debt, essentially. And here is the statistic that really highlights the, dysfunction of the system. In major cities like Milwaukee, the data showed up to 70% of tenants are no-shows for their court dates.
70%.
70. In some other urban centers, the numbers are even worse. Maybe only 10% of tenants actually appear in court to defend themselves.
I want to push on that number. 70%. That seems incredibly high. Is it just that people don't care, or is there something systemic happening? Because if I'm about to lose my apartment, I feel like I would move heaven and earth to be at that hearing.
It's easy to assume apathy, but the reality is usually a combination of resources and despair. Yes. First, let's just consider the logistics. The notice itself. There's a practice called sewer service, where a process server is supposed to deliver the court summons, but just doesn't. They claim they did, but they just threw it away.
So the tenant literally never knows they were supposed to be in court.
It happens. But even if they get the notice, think about the calculation they're making. They know they don't have the rent money. That's not in dispute. They don't have a lawyer. And unlike in criminal court, you have no constitutional right to a public defender in a civil housing court case.
That's a huge point. So you're on your own.
You are completely on your own. So they think, why should I go? I'm going to lose anyway. I can't afford to take a day off my hourly wage job to go sit in a courthouse for 4 or 5 hours, find parking, maybe arrange childcare, just to go in front of a judge for 2 minutes and be told I've lost.
So it's a surrender based on the asymmetry of the fight. It feels hopeless.
Exactly. The landlord almost always has legal counsel or a professional agent who does this for a living. The tenant almost never does. It's a professional fighting an amateur. The outcome feels predetermined, so they don't show up, and a default judgment is entered against them.
Okay, so the gavel comes down, judgment for the landlord.
Uh-huh.
We still haven't physically moved the person. Does the landlord get to go change the locks now, after they have the court order?
Still no, and this is a really, really important distinction in the process. The judge doesn't hand the landlord a key. The judge issues a writ of possession or a warrant of removal.
More legal terms.
More legal terms. But what it is an order from the court that's directed to law enforcement, usually the county sheriff or, in some cities, a marshal. They are the only people legally authorized to physically remove a human being and their possessions from a property.
It's the state's monopoly on force again. It has to be an agent of the state.
Correct. The landlord gives the writ to the sheriff's office. The sheriff then comes out to the property, usually posts another notice on the door that says something like, "You have 24 hours to vacate," and then they return to execute the writ.
And that's the moment of truth.
That is the moment, and there are some fascinating, almost medieval quirks to this part of the process. For example, the rainy day exception.
I saw this in the notes and I couldn't believe it. Some jurisdictions won't evict someone in bad weather.
That's right. If it's snowing or there's a heavy sleet or a torrential downpour, some sheriff's departments will not execute the writ that day. Their policy is they won't put a family out onto the street in the middle of a storm.
That feels like this tiny, strange shred of humanity in an otherwise cold mechanical process.
It is. It's this moment of discretion that says, we are going to make you homeless, but we won't get you wet while we do it. It's bizarre, but it's there.
And then we get back to that photo we started with. The pile of stuff on the curb. Legally, what is supposed to happen to all of those possessions?
It varies tremendously by state, which makes it really confusing. In some places, it goes right to the curb. It's called a curbside eviction. It's brutal and immediate. The sheriff stands by while the landlord's movers take everything out and put it on the sidewalk.
And then it's just fair game for anyone walking by.
Pretty much. In other states, there are more protections. The law might require the landlord to pay movers to take the tenant's belongings to a designated storage facility.
Okay, that sounds a bit more humane.
It is, but there's a catch. The tenant then has a window, say 30 days, to come and claim their property. But here's the kicker. They usually have to pay the moving and storage fees to get it back.
Which, if they couldn't pay the rent, they almost certainly can't pay hundreds of dollars in storage fees.
Precisely. It's an insurmountable barrier for most. So the storage company or the landlord eventually options it all off to try and pay the arrears. It's a process that strips the tenant of not just their shelter, but all of their assets, their clothes, their furniture, their kids' toys, their family photos. It is a total liquidation of the household.
Now, everything we've discussed so far, it assumes the tenant did something wrong, usually non-payment of rent. But as I was reading through the source material, the thing that really, truly unnerved me, and I don't use that word lightly, was this concept of no-fault evictions. The idea that you can follow every single rule, pay every dime on time, be the perfect neighbor, and still lose your home.
This is where the conversation shifts from contract breaches to raw real estate economics. This is where we get into the mechanics of gentrification. A no-fault eviction is exactly what it sounds like. The landlord wants the property back, not because of a breach by the tenant, but because of their own preference or, more often, a business strategy.
But isn't that what leases and rent control are supposed to prevent?
Security of tenure, right.
Yeah,
The idea
right.
that you have a right to stay as long as you follow the rules.
Theoretically, yes, but the legal loopholes are vast and, in some cases, deliberately created. Let's look at the Ellis Act in California. This is a massive issue in places like San Francisco, Santa Monica, and Los Angeles.
The Ellis Act, what does it do? The Ellis Act is a state law that says, fundamentally, you cannot force a landlord to stay in the business of being a landlord. If a property owner wants to go out of business, which means retiring the entire building from the rental market, they have the right to evict everyone living there.
Okay, that sounds fair on the surface. If I own a building and I'm getting old and want to retire, or I want to move my whole family in, I should be able to do that.
And that was the original stated intent of the law, to protect small mom-and-pop landlords. But here's how it's been weaponized by real estate speculators.
How so?
A development company will buy a building full of long-term rent-controlled tenants who are paying, say, $800 a month in a neighborhood where market rate is now $4,000. They can't evict them for non-payment because they're paying, so they invoke the Ellis Act.
They claim they're going out of business.
Yeah. Exactly. They evict everyone, clearing the entire building. Then maybe they do some cosmetic renovations and convert the units into tenancies in common or condos and sell them individually for a massive profit. Or they just let the building sit vacant for the legally required period and then re-enter the rental market at the new sky-high prices.
So it's a legal workaround to completely break rent control.
It is the nuclear option for resetting a building's revenue stream. It wipes out the existing, often lower-income community to make way for a new, wealthier demographic. It's an engine of displacement.
There's another term that came up in this section that sounds similar, renoviction. It's even got that kind of portmanteau feel to it.
It is. It's a blend of renovation and eviction. The playbook is pretty standard. The landlord says, I need to do substantial repairs, rewire the whole building, replace all the plumbing, major structural work, and I can't possibly do it with you living here. For safety reasons, you have to leave.
And once the tenant is out,
the renovations happen. Sometimes they're real, sometimes they're fairly cosmetic, and then the unit goes back on the market at double or triple the original rent. The eviction was just a tool to get the rent-controlled tenant out so the price could be reset.
but aren't there protections against this? I see a note here about Ontario, Canada, having something called a right of first refusal. What's that?
Yes, in places like Ontario, the law tries to mitigate this. It says if you are rent-evicted, you have the legal right to move back into your old unit at the same rent once the work is done.
Well, that sounds like a pretty good protection.
It sounds good on paper, but think about the logistics in reality. A major renovation could take 6 months, maybe a year, sometimes longer. The evicted tenant has to find somewhere else to live in the meantime. They have to pack up their life, find a new place, sign a new one-year lease.
They have to move on.
They have to move on with their life. Are they really going to break their new lease and pay to move back a year later? Most people can't or won't. The landlord knows this. It's a war of attrition that the tenant almost always loses.
It's using the disruption of life as a weapon.
That's a good way to put it.
There's one more in this category that sounds even more sinister. Retaliatory eviction. What's the scenario here?
This is when a landlord tries to use the eviction process to punish a tenant. The classic example is, say, your heat is broken in the middle of winter. You call the landlord, they ignore you. You call again, nothing. So you finally call the city code inspector.
You exercise your rights.
You exercise your legal rights. The inspector comes out, finds a violation, and orders the landlord to make the repair. 2 weeks later, you get an eviction notice.
For what?
Well, the landlord will claim it's for something else. Oh, you were playing your music too loud last month. Or you left a bike in the hallway, some minor trumped-up charge. But the timing makes it obvious that it's punishment for you calling the city on them.
Can you fight that in court?
You can, and many laws are designed to help with that. They create what's called a rebuttable presumption. If an eviction action is filed within, say, 90 days or up to a year after a tenant makes a formal complaint or organizes a tenant union, the court automatically assumes it's retaliation.
So the burden of proof shifts.
Exactly. The landlord then has to prove to the court that they had a legitimate, non-retaliatory reason for the eviction. But again, it means going to court, fighting, and dealing with all that stress.
Speaking of stress, let's talk about real estate mobbing, because when I first read this term, I thought it sounded like something out of an organized crime movie.
It's not that far off, behaviorally. The term mobbing comes from sociology and psychology. It refers to group bullying, like in a workplace, where a group targets an individual to push them out.
And this is a recognized thing.
It is. The UN has recognized it as a housing rights violation, and it's even a specific legal concept in Spain. They call it acoso inmobiliario.
So give us the playbook. What does this look like in practice? It's not a formal notice.
No, it's the opposite. It's psychological warfare. It's what a landlord or developer does when they can't legally evict you. Maybe you have a very strong protected contract, so they decide to make your life so miserable that you leave voluntarily.
It's a forced choice.
Right. They might refuse to fix the boiler in the dead of winter. They might hire people to make loud construction noises in the hallway at all hours of the day and night. They might sabotage the locks on the main door.
It's about making the home a hostile, unlivable environment.
It's a siege. Exactly. Yeah. I've read cases of landlords removing the front door to the building for repairs and just leaving it off for weeks, exposing the whole building to the elements and security risks, or shutting off the water supply intermittently without notice. It's all designed to induce a state of constant anxiety and stress so severe that the tenant finally breaks and flees, just to preserve their own mental health.
But how on earth do you prove that in court? A landlord can just say, hey, I'm a bad property manager, I'm incompetent, but I'm not mobbing anyone.
And that is the core difficulty. Proving intent is incredibly hard. Unless you have a smoking gun email where the landlord says to their manager, let's freeze them out, it often just looks like a pattern of really bad negligence. But the effect on the tenant is exactly the same as a formal eviction. Forced displacement, but done completely outside the law.
We've been focusing very, very heavily on this individual level, the landlord versus the tenant. But the source material takes this massive pivot here. It zooms way out to the global stage. And we stop talking about lease contracts and we start talking about state power.
This is absolutely essential context. If you want to understand eviction on a global scale, it isn't just about unpaid rent. In many parts of the world, it is a primary tool of economic development and direct government revenue.
The section on China is mind-blowing. We're not talking about a few dozen tenants in a building. We're talking about forced eviction or land requisition on a scale that is genuinely hard to comprehend.
To understand eviction in China, you have to first understand their local tax structure. It's not just about developers being greedy, it's about how local governments literally keep the lights on.
Break that down for us. Why is the local government so directly involved in evicting its own citizens?
Okay, so in China, local governments are responsible for providing a huge amount of public services, infrastructure, schools, hospitals, all of it. But they have very limited ways to raise their own tax revenue. They can't just jack up property taxes the way a city in the United States might.
So they have a revenue problem.
A massive one. So they came to rely on land transfer fees. Basically, they take control of land, often rural or old urban land, and then sell the long-term usage rights to commercial developers for enormous sums of money.
So the government needs to clear and sell the land to fund itself.
Correct. And the data point from Professor Guan Qingyu at Tsinghua University is just staggering. In 2010, land sales accounted for 74% of local government income in China.
74%. That's not a side hustle, that's the entire business model.
It is the whole budget. So just imagine the incentive structure that creates. You are a local official. You have a plot of land occupied by a rural village or an old low-rise neighborhood. It's not generating much revenue for you. But if you can evict those people and sell that land to a developer to build a new skyscraper or a shopping mall, you've just funded your entire government for the next year.
The eviction isn't a byproduct of development. It is the development model.
It's structural. It's baked right into the financial survival of the state.
And that explains the unrest. The outline mentions that something like 65% of mass conflicts in China stem directly from these eviction and land grievances.
Of course. When you take people's land, which is not just their home, but their livelihood and their ancestral history, purely for revenue, resistance is inevitable. But the power of the state is, of course, overwhelming.
We see a different but related version of this development narrative in Nigeria. The numbers here are just tragic. Over 2 million people forcefully evicted in a single decade.
Between 2000 and 2009, yes. And we need to look at Lagos specifically to understand this. This is a megacity, one of the fastest growing in the world. The government wants to project an image of a modern global financial hub, a new Dubai.
But a huge portion of the population lives in what are called informal settlements, slums.
That's right. And these settlements clash with that shiny modern image.
Tell us about Makoko, because the description of the floating slum is so vivid.
Makoko is an incredible place. It's a community built almost entirely on stilts over the Lagos Lagoon. It's been there for over 100 years. It started as a fishing village for migrants. It has its own economy, its own schools, its own social structure. It's a functioning city on the water. But to the authorities, it's an eyesore. It doesn't fit the Dubai of Africa vision.
It's not on the brochure.
Not at all. So what happened?
Right.
In July 2012, the government gave residents 72 hours notice.
72 hours.
72 hours to dismantle a city that had existed for a century. Then the government boats came in with men with chainsaws, and they just started sawing through the stilts that held up the houses. Buildings just collapsed into the lagoon. In a matter of days, 30,000 people were made homeless.
30,000.
Yeah.
And where do 30,000 people go?
That is the question the government never has an answer for. They just dissolve. They dissolve into the rest of the city, overcrowding other slums, sleeping under bridges, moving in with distant relatives. It's displacement without any plan for resettlement.
And it keeps happening.
It does. We saw it again in Charcoal Bay in 2020. The military came in and evicted thousands of residents. The official reason given was to stop oil theft from pipelines running through the area.
But the real reason was?
Well, it just so happens that Charcoal Bay is a beautiful stretch of beach that is perfect for luxury hotels and real estate development. The oil theft narrative provides a convenient justification. We saw it in Ototo Bay, an ancestral fishing community that was sacked and burned to the ground despite court injunctions trying to stop it.
So it's a clear pattern. You criminalize the residents, you call them squatters, you call them thieves, you call them a security threat, to justify clearing the land for profit, whether that profit is for the state or private developers.
It's the same playbook used around the world. It happens in Cambodia, it happens in Indonesia. In Phnom Penh, we've seen thousands evicted with zero consultation and then sent to these awful resettlement sites that are miles from their jobs with no clean water or electricity. It's treating human beings as debris that just needs to be swept away for the sake of progress.
There is one really interesting counterexample in the data, though. A moment where the entire global machine of eviction just stopped. Australia in 2020.
The COVID moratorium, yes.
This was fascinating to me because it really challenges the sense of inevitability about all of this.
It really does. On March 29, 2020, Prime Minister Scott Morrison, who is a conservative politician, it's important to note, not some radical, he announced a nationwide moratorium on evictions.
And what was the logic?
The logic was simple: public health. We were in the middle of a global pandemic. If we start kicking thousands of people out of their homes, they can't shelter in place, they'll end up in crowded shelters or moving between family members' houses, and they will spread the virus. We needed people to stay home to stop the pandemic. So for 6 months, the entire machinery of removal was just turned off.
And that proves that eviction is a policy choice. It's not a law of physics that's not inevitable. We, as a society, choose to prioritize a landlord's right to immediate possession over a tenant's right to shelter.
That's it.
And when the stakes were high enough, literally life and death from a virus, we chose differently for a little while.
Precisely. It showed that the system can be paused, the sky doesn't fall. But of course, once that pause was lifted, the backlog of cases hit the courts with a vengeance. And that brings us to the aftermath. Because whether it's a mass eviction in Lagos or a single mother being evicted in Milwaukee, the consequences don't end when the lock is changed on the door. That's just the beginning.
Let's talk about that aftermath. Let's talk about the Scarlet E, the eviction record.
In the United States, this is a distinct and modern crisis. We live in the age of big data. When a landlord files an eviction case against you in court, a public record is created. And this is the critical part. That record is created the moment of filing, not the moment of judgment.
So even if you win your case?
Even if you win. Even if the case is dismissed because the landlord made an error. Even if you pay the back rent and the case is withdrawn. That record of the filing often still exists.
And tenant screening companies scrape that court data.
Constantly. They hoover it all up, package it into reports, and sell it to other landlords for a fee.
So you've been evicted, or even just had an eviction filed against you. You go to apply for a new apartment, the new landlord runs a $30 background check, it pops up, eviction filing 2023, and boom, application denied.
It's a blacklist.
It is a modern digital blacklist. And in most states, that record stays public and follows you for 7 years. We are talking about a digital shackle that can effectively prevent you from accessing the mainstream housing market for the better part of a decade.
It's a punishment that long outlasts the actual event.
It's a secondary punishment that's arguably worse than the initial loss of housing itself.
So where do these people go if no reputable landlord with a decent apartment will take them?
They are forced into the absolute bottom of the market. They are forced to rent from slumlords who don't run background checks because their properties are in such bad condition that they can't attract other tenants.
So you're pushed into worse housing.
You're pushed into substandard, often unsafe housing. Or you end up in extended stay motels, which are incredibly expensive. Or you end up in homeless shelters or sleeping on a relative's couch. It forces a downward mobility spiral that is incredibly difficult to escape.
But beyond the economics of it, I want to spend some real time on the psychology. The expert notes you sent over reference the Skinner box. Now, I remember this from Psych 101. It's about rats pressing levers for food. How on earth does this apply to eviction?
It's a terrifyingly accurate parallel. B.F. Skinner's experiments were about operant conditioning. He'd put a rat in a box. If the rat pressed a lever, sometimes it got a food pellet. Sometimes it got a painful electric shock. But here's the key finding that is relevant to us. The key to creating maximum stress and neurotic, panicked behavior in the animal wasn't the consistency of the pain, it was the unpredictability of it.
Not knowing what was coming next.
Exactly. If you know the shock is coming every minute, on the minute you can at least brace for it. You can anticipate it. But if it's random, if you never know when the shock is coming, you live in a constant state of hyperarousal, unending terror.
Okay, so now map that onto the eviction process.
Yeah. You get the initial notice. You don't know if the landlord is actually going to file the lawsuit or if it's just a scare tactic. Then you get the court summons. You go to court. You don't know if the judge will rule that day or delay the case. Then you lose. The judge issues the writ. Now the clock is ticking, but you don't know when the sheriff is actually coming.
Is it Tuesday morning? Is it Friday afternoon?
You have no idea. Is that knock on the door the pizza delivery, or is it the sheriff with 2 deputies? Every time you hear heavy footsteps in the hallway, your heart stops. Every time a car pulls up outside, you freeze. You are living inside a Skinner box, waiting for the unpredictable shock.
That's a genuinely chilling way to think about it. And the sources say this leads to a form of learned helplessness.
It does. Observers and even law enforcement often ask, why didn't they pack? The sheriff is here and their stuff is still everywhere. They knew this was coming.
I've wondered that myself.
And the reason is often that the psychological stress is so overwhelming that the person just shuts down. They go into a state of denial. They try to just ride it out because the reality of packing up their entire life with nowhere to go is too big and too painful to process. So they do nothing. They freeze.
And the long-term impact on mental health from living in that Skinner box.
It's devastating. The research shows dramatically higher rates of depression, anxiety, and PTSD among people who have been evicted compared to low-income renters who haven't. And most sobering, there's a statistical correlation with suicide rates. The stress of losing your home can be a final breaking point for people already struggling.
And this doesn't just fade away once they find a new place?
No. The data shows that even years after the event, people who have been evicted are statistically less happy, less optimistic, and feel they have less agency and control over their own lives than people who may have moved for other reasons, even other negative reasons. You fundamentally destroy their sense of safety and stability in the world.
There's one final piece of this puzzle that completely flips the script on how we normally think about poverty. You called it the economic spiral. We usually assume the story goes like this. You lose your job, then you run out of money, and then, as a result, you get evicted.
That's the standard narrative, right? Eviction is a consequence of personal or economic failure.
But the research you pointed us to suggests the arrow of causality often goes the other way. Eviction actually causes job loss.
Matthew Desmond's research was absolutely pivotal here. He found that a worker is 15% more likely to be laid off from their job in the months after an eviction has taken place.
15%. That's a huge number. But why? What's the connection?
Think about the sheer amount of mental and logistical bandwidth it takes to be evicted. You are on the phone all day with legal aid services trying to get help. You are spending your evenings desperately scrolling through apartment listings you know you can't afford. You are stressed out. You are sleep deprived because you're worried sick.
You can't focus at work.
You can't focus. You miss a shift because you have to go to court. You show up late because you had to sleep at your sister's house, which is across town and adds an hour to your commute. The chaos and instability in your housing life makes you, in the eyes of your employer, a bad employee. You become unreliable, not because you're lazy, but because your life is in turmoil.
So the eviction itself creates the poverty and instability that we then use to justify the eviction in the first place.
It is a vicious, self-perpetuating trap, and once you fall into it, getting out is incredibly expensive. You lose your security deposit, you have to pay for a moving truck or a storage unit, you have to come up with a new security deposit and first month's rent for a new place, if you can even find one. You are literally paying more to be poor.
We have covered a lot of ground today. I mean, from the driest legal definitions to the revenue schemes of the Chinese government to the floating slums of Lagos, and then all the way down into the human brain and the psychology of the Skinner box.
It's a heavy picture when you assemble all the pieces.
It really is. But I think it's necessary to see it this clearly, because usually we just see the for rent sign on a lawn. We don't see the complex, often brutal process that put it there.
We tend to treat eviction as a simple, necessary function of the market. The logic is simple. If you don't pay, you can't stay. It rhymes. It makes perfect sense on a spreadsheet.
It's a clean transaction.
Right. But when you look at the real collateral damage, the mental illness it triggers, the negative effects on child development, the job losses, the destruction of community assets, You have to start asking if the price society pays for that efficiency is actually far too high.
And that's really the thought I want to end on today. We have built a machine that is, in many places, incredibly efficient at removal. We have specialized courts, we have databases, we have sheriffs who do this every day. The machine works. But we have to ask ourselves, if housing stability is the absolute bedrock of a functional citizen, if you need a stable home to keep a job, to raise a healthy kid, to stay mentally and physically healthy, then what are we actually doing to our society by making it so easy, so fast, to pull that rug out from under people?
It suggests that our efficiency in removal might actually be a profound inefficiency in building a healthy, stable society.
So next time you see a pile of belongings on a curb, or you see a new luxury condo going up in a neighborhood that used to look very different, maybe don't just walk past. Ask the question, who was there before, and where did they go?
And crucially, how are they doing now?
Thanks for joining us on the deep dive. We'll see you next time.